Hello, my name is Danny Henson, and I am a missionary pilot for the Philippine Adventist Medical Aviation Services. That's a ministry of Gospel Ministries International out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And for the past 3.5 years, I've been working in the Philippine Islands, ministering to the Muslim people there. And I'd like to share with you my story today and give testimony to what God is doing in my life and in the work that we do here in the Philippines. It wasn't always something that interested me. I didn't always have a love or a passion for the Muslim people of the world. As a matter of fact, in September 11th, 2001, the United States was radically changed by a terrorist attack there. I can remember clearly that morning I was working as an electrician. We were building a General Motors car plant in southern Tennessee, and I was on a lift when the news came that the towers had been hit by airplanes. I was, like most Americans, pretty upset by this news. And that evening I got in a car and drove to the nearest military recruit depot and asked them to take my name and my information so that if we went to war, I'd be the first to go. Many Americans became very patriotic during this time. They wanted to fight against this unknown enemy. And just a few years later, I was visiting with a friend one day. I had become a Christian and given my life to the Lord, but I still harbored a great deal of animosity about the war. Many of my friends had left and fought in Afghanistan and Iraq and come back from the war changed, destroyed mentally and psychologically, spiritually as well. And I was troubled about this. So one afternoon, while visiting a friend, we began talking about the war and the things that were going on in our country. We were talking about our friends and how they'd been changed. And I was upset. And during the conversation, I turned to my friend Michael, and I said, you know, we should really just go into these Middle Eastern countries and drop some bombs and try to destroy these people. And after our conversation, I climbed into my car and I was on my way home, and I was greatly disturbed by what I had said. The Holy Spirit brought it to my attention that this was not the right way to represent Jesus. And to be honest, I couldn't sleep. For 3 days, I tried to lay down and close my eyes to sleep at night, and I couldn't find it. I was just greatly disturbed by what I had said. I recognized that if Jesus lived in me, that I could harbor no hatred towards anyone, that I would love my enemies. And I was very troubled. Finally, I realized I had to do something. I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about it continually. So I called my friend Michael. He answered the phone. It was in the middle of the day and he was at work. And I said, Michael, do you remember the conversation we had about the war the other day? And he, of course, remembered, and I explained to him that I needed to ask for his forgiveness. Now, he thought that was pretty strange and asked why I was requesting such a thing. He had agreed with everything I was saying. I said, I understand that we were in agreement on this issue, but I need you to know that Jesus would not have condoned the massacre of 1/4 of the world's population. As a matter of fact, He laid down His life so we wouldn't have to. And what I had said did not represent the God that I serve or the message that I represent. And I asked for Him to forgive me. And He agreed that maybe I was right. And he forgave me, and we ended our conversation. It wasn't 30 seconds after the phone call had ended that I walked into my bedroom and I kneeled down next to my bed. Now, I don't know why. For 3 days I didn't pray, or even think to pray about this issue. But for the first time, I kneeled down in the solitude of my room, and I spoke to Jesus. And I asked Him to change my heart towards the Muslim people. I recognized that I was nothing like him, that I didn't love the way he loved, and that I didn't feel the feelings that he felt towards his enemies. Just the opposite. So I ended that prayer and I stood up and began to walk into the living room, where I was met by my mother. She was sitting on the living room couch and she was watching Loma Linda Broadcasting Network. And she stopped me to say, "Dan, you really should watch this program that I'm watching here. It's really interesting." So I sat down on the couch, and as I turned my attention to the TV, there was a man named Stephen Dickey, and he was interviewing another man named Brian Gallant. Brian was a missionary in Cambodia, and had worked among a Muslim group for 2 years in that country. And he shared his story, how he'd fallen in love with the Muslim people, how he had studied the Quran and found these beautiful bridges from the Quran to the Scriptures, and how many people's lives were changed during that time, including his own. And tears began to run down my face. I had just prayed. Just moments before, I had prayed, and this was clearly an immediate answer to my prayer. An email flashed across the bottom of the screen, and I quickly sent off an email to Brian. Just weeks later, he had sent me a Quran and many other books in the mail for me to begin to read. We were having regular conversations on the phone each week, praying together. And I began a search in the Bible, in the Quran, in our prophetic history in the Adventist Church, to try to discover what God's plan was for these people and how I could change my heart towards the Muslim people. He answered my prayer miraculously. Not long after this, I was invited to travel to Georgia and to some other places where missionaries were meeting to share their testimonies about the work that they were doing in Muslim countries. I spent the next 3 years in deep study of the Quran. Lots of people ask me, "What are you doing? What is your intention here? Why are you reading this evil book?" But that's not what I discovered at all. As I read, I became very excited at what I was finding. Beautiful scriptures. The 10 Commandments revisited. A command to keep the Sabbath, and a correct understanding of what happens when we die. These are the fundamentals that we hold so dear in our faith. The Bible, the truths of the Bible that we've been sharing with the world now for 170 years. I found them in the Quran, and for the last 3 years, I've been sharing them with Muslims. My life has changed, and now I've loved Muslims and had wonderful relationships with these dear people. And I want to share with you today that if there's any hatred or animosity in your heart towards Muslims or Hindus or anyone else, you too can pray to God, and you could ask Him to give you a new heart, to give you a love for a people or a person that maybe you have a prejudice against, and He'll do the same for you. In the island of Mindanao, there's been conflict for hundreds of years. I've been blessed to be able to live in the Philippines and to work in this island and to see Christians and Muslims come together in partnership and love to study the Bible in preparation for the coming of Jesus Christ. Please pray for the work that's going forward in the Philippines and all over the world in this effort to share Jesus with Islam. And thank you for allowing me to share my story.